Good evening everyone, welcome to BAJIRAO IAS Academy, the Hindu News Analysis. Today is 6th September 2025 and today we have some very important topics in this analysis from the Hindu newspaper. And the first topic is about India's strategic autonomy. In the context of recent India's foreign policy moves, strategic autonomy is a very important policy and a very important topic. So we'll understand what exactly is strategic autonomy and how India has been following the policy of strategic autonomy and how India is going to be benefited from this particular policy, and we will also look into some challenges of it as well. Apart from that, few other important topics that we are going to take up, including the particularly vulnerable tribal groups, GST 2.4 reforms, and also mpox disease. Now coming back to the strategic autonomy as a topic, so this topic has been given in the Hindu newspaper and this is a very important topic. So first let's understand the definition of strategic autonomy. Now what exactly is a strategic autonomy? So if we talk about the strategic autonomy, it actually means the ability of a country to take decisions, to take independent and sovereign decisions on its own. So this is what is called as the strategic autonomy, and in fact India follows the policy of strategic autonomy right from India's independence, right? So if you can look at this, so strategic autonomy actually means the ability of a country to make foreign and defense policies in an independent and sovereign manner, right? So this decision making is free from the external coercion, external pressure, and the binding alliances also. Now whatever decisions that we are going to take, so they serve our national interest. They must serve our core national interest rather than the alliance commitments or binding alliances or external pressure or external coercion. So one example is India continues to import Russian oil. So in fact importing Russian oil is in India's interest because it ensures India's energy security. So despite Western pressure, Western sanctions, India goes ahead and continues to purchase Russian oil because it is in our sole national interest, and this is the best example of strategic autonomy. And in fact India's policy of strategic autonomy, so it actually emphasizes on India's ability to take decisions in a sovereign manner, because we are a sovereign nation and we take decisions in a sovereign and independent manner, and this also symbolizes adaptability and flexibility on the part of our country as well, because the concept of strategic autonomy, it focuses on maintaining freedom in policy choices, policy decisions, particularly with respect to the foreign policy. But strategic autonomy should not be understood as isolationism and neutrality. For example, if India follows the policy of strategic autonomy, so that doesn't mean that we are following the policy of neutrality or isolationism. And in fact with respect to the Russia-Ukraine war, India's policy is not a neutral policy. India always condemns the Russia's aggression against Ukraine, not openly, not directly, and India always calls for peaceful settlement and peaceful resolution of the Russia-Ukraine war. So therefore this actually means, it doesn't mean isolationism rather and neutrality, but it actually highlights a balanced and adaptable diplomatic stance on the part of India. So in fact if we talk about the strategic autonomy, I can say that this strategic autonomy as a policy is a pragmatic policy on the part of India, because a strategic autonomy actually represents a tested and practical approach in historical and contemporary geopolitics as well. So right from India's independence, India followed this policy of strategic autonomy, however with the different names, but India continues to follow the policy of strategic autonomy. So therefore India has been following a realistic and pragmatic foreign policy through the strategic autonomy. And in fact the policy of strategic autonomy that India has been following, so it has been evolved from academia. So once it was purely an academic domain, it was just an idea that countries looked at this policy of strategic autonomy as an idea, but now the policy of strategic autonomy has actually evolved as India's foreign policy element, a fundamental to India's foreign policy. So therefore it actually showcases its commitment to the agency in a multipolar world order, right? So this is the definition and the context of the policy of strategic autonomy, because India's policy of strategic autonomy is also questioned by number of countries, and those countries are also looking at India's policy of strategic autonomy as a neutral stance or India's isolationism, right? So it doesn't mean that neutrality or isolationism. Rather, we can say that this policy is a pragmatic policy that believes in India's core national interests along with the fundamental interests of the international order. So let's understand the India, US, India, China, and India, Russia, and India Global South cooperation as part of the strategic autonomy, because we have just discussed that strategic autonomy is actually a pragmatic policy, and that actually decides India's relations with a number of other countries as well. So let's understand what exactly is a strategic autonomy means for US. Now in fact, India's strategic autonomy with respect to US actually means deepening, strengthening the bilateral and multilateral ties, right? So that is what happened with US. So over the last 2 decades we have deepened, strengthened our bilateral relations with US, because if we talk about India's engagement with US, so we have engaged with US in multiple domains, whether it is defense, security, intelligence, technology, and climate change and joint military exercise. So it extended to number of areas where India and US have been coming together and they have been working with each other, right? So strategic autonomy as a policy also maintains this stance that India's policy is a pragmatic and realistic policy, not an idealistic policy, not a utopian policy that will not be implementable. And apart from that, if you look at India's engagement with US, not just bilaterally but also multilaterally in the Indo-Pacific region, both India and US wanted to achieve the free, open, inclusive Indo-Pacific, and US has also come up with Indo-Pacific strategy, making India a key partner in the Indo-Pacific region. So in order to maintain security, stability in the Indo-Pacific region, so US and India along with other like-minded countries have established quadrilateral security dialogue, which is also called as Quad. And in West Asia also, these countries have come together and they have established I2U2. And in this I2U2, India, Israel, UAE, and United States of America are member countries. And apart from that, during India's presidency at G20 summit in 2023, so India, Middle East, Europe Economic Corridor has also been launched. So all these are the examples of the multilateral initiatives or the multilateral engagement between India and US. But despite a robust engagement, strengthening, deepening India's ties with US, there are still challenges between India and US relations. For example, when India has been importing oil from Russia, so US has put a lot of pressure on India, and US has also asked India not to import oil from Russia. And in fact, US under Donald Trump in his second term also put 50% tariffs on India. So 25% tariffs or reciprocal tariffs and 25% tariffs as sanctions on India for importing Russian oil. So therefore, a kind of a diplomatic tensions have also started between India and US under President Donald Trump as well. However, India's strategic autonomy actually means, despite a lot of pressure on India from US, India continues to purchase Russian oil. So that indicates India's policy of strategic autonomy, because purchasing Russian oil is in the interest of India's energy security. However, we will engage with US bilaterally and multilaterally. We express our concerns with US. So this is what is called as the policy of strategic autonomy, because energy security is India's concern. So therefore, India will express its concerns to US, right? So therefore, this is how the strategic autonomy has been guiding India and US relationships. So let's understand India and China relationship and how strategic autonomy as a policy has been guiding the relationship between India and China. And in fact, the policy of strategic autonomy, particularly with respect to China. Now, one thing that we should understand is that now China is also a developing country and India is also a developing country. So in fact, for India, China is the largest trading partner. Now, apart from the largest trading partner, both India and China are members of the BRICS grouping, Shanghai Cooperation Organization grouping, and also RIC, which is Russia, India and China. So to some extent, both of these countries have common interests and shared vision as well. However, India also considers China as a strategic rival. Now, few things that we should understand: 1962 war, China is solely responsible. China has also occupied a lot of land in Excise region of India, and apart from that, China very often claims and Arunachal Pradesh is a part of China, and it also very often changes names in Arunachal Pradesh, which is an integral part of India. And in fact, the line of actual control, which is an unsettled border between India and China, so in fact still it is a disputed boundary, because we have several clashes, whether at Galwan 2020 or Doklam 2017. Doklam 2017, there were minor skirmishes between Indian and Chinese soldiers, but in 2020, so the clashes between Indian and Chinese soldiers led to the death of 20 Indian soldiers. So despite these differences, despite suspicions on Chinese intentions in the Indian Ocean region, because China has come up with a policy called string of pearls strategy. So despite such intentions of China, so India considers China as a key player or key partner, because as I have already told you that we have a huge trade with China. China is the largest trade partner for India. And another concern with China for India is we are having a huge trade deficit, that it will be very difficult for India to bridge such a huge trade deficit. But the policy of strategic autonomy has enabled India to have a dual track diplomacy with China. Now, what exactly is a dual track diplomacy that has been suggested by the policy of strategic autonomy with respect to China? Now, this dual track diplomacy means with respect to the border clashes and China's border assertiveness and aggression, so India also shows a strong deterrence. India is also strong, resilient. Now, apart from that, India is also ready to engage with China, right? So this is what is called as dual track diplomacy, and this dual track diplomacy is a realistic and pragmatic foreign policy, and that has been suggested by the strategic autonomy. So I hope you have understood this as well. So let's understand India and Russia relationship. So let's understand how the strategic autonomy as a policy has been guiding India and Russia relationships in a very detailed way. Now, we have been importing Russian oil, and in fact India is the second largest purchaser of Russian oil, and in fact traditionally India is dependent on Russia for its military and security and defense equipment. So therefore, India continues to purchase Russian oil and defense equipment. Even as of now, if you look at Russia, Russia is more aligned with China, right? So despite Russia is aligned with China, so India has been continues to purchase crude oil or energy, and apart from that, the defense supplies as well. And India has also been facing a lot of pressure on this Russia-Ukraine war, but despite that, India continues to import the defense equipment and also the energy supplies. Now, one example is recently India has purchased S-400 missile defense system, and this S-400 missile defense system has played a very important role during Operation Sindoor, right? So apart from that, we are also in plans to procure the 5th generation fighter jets from Russia as well. So despite Russia aligned closely with China, we are ready to engage with Russia because that actually serves our national interest, and this is also a part of India's policy of strategic autonomy. And in fact, India very often rejects the Western criticism because West always criticizes India. India has been purchasing Russian oil, Russian defense supplies, and because of this reason, so what is the criticism of the West? So West criticizes India as India has been a democracy, and despite a democracy, so India has been sided with countries like China and Russia. So this is the criticism that India faces very often, right? So India very often rejects the Western criticism by asserting that external powers cannot dictate its international partnerships. So thereby India emphasizes on the sovereign decision making, the independent decision making. So this is what is called as the strategic autonomy. So despite we have a huge dependence on Russia for our defense supplies, so what India has been doing over a period of time, India has been looking to diversify its defense imports. For example, we have been importing the defense equipment from Israel, France, US, for all those countries, apart from that, giving a sustained push to the domestic defense making as well. So therefore, this is what a realistic and pragmatic foreign policy looks like, right? So India has been expanding its defense procurement from other countries as well, and apart from that, enhancing the domestic defense production and technology, right? So on the one hand, we have been engaging with Russia with respect to defense and energy and other important domains, and on the other hand, we have also been diversifying our energy and defense supply so that we will not completely dependent on Russia, right? So this is the policy of strategic autonomy. So this is how the policy of strategic autonomy has been guiding the relations between India and Russia. Now apart from that, India is not completely reliant on countries like Russia. We have been building the strategic alliances, for example Quad, I2U2. So all these are the alliances that India has been building, and recently Prime Minister Narendra Modi also attended the G7 summit that took place in Canada. Now G7 is a Western alliance of democracies and industrialized developed countries. So therefore, India is also actively building new strategic alliances to adopt the geopolitical realities and also reduce the dependence on countries like Russia, right? So this is how the policy of strategic autonomy has been guiding India's relations with countries like Russia, US and China. So in fact, so if we talk about the global south, now in global south also, the best example is India when it was the president of G20 summit in the year 2023. So we have invited the African Union, and African Union was also made part of the G20 summit. So that was one of the biggest achievement of India's leadership to the global south, and that also a part of the global south. That is also part of the India's policy of strategic autonomy. So in fact, if we look at India's leadership role in the global south and how India's policy of strategic autonomy has been guiding India's approach towards the global south. So in fact, a global south is a region which has been facing common challenges. For example, higher levels of poverty, lower levels of economic development, lack of education, lack of healthcare facilities, lack of infrastructure, inadequate economic growth, and higher levels of unemployment, increasing crime rates, climate change, terrorism, violence, separatism, secessionism. So therefore, the global south has been facing all those problems, common challenges, common problems. And in fact, India being the fourth largest economy with a significant size of population and a military power. So India claims that it can become the leader of the global south, and that is also very important for its membership into the United Nations Security Council permanent member, to become a permanent member, right? So therefore, during India's 2023 G20 presidency, so it has highlighted India's leadership role among middle powers, right? So Prime Minister Narendra Modi and External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar presented India as a sovereign and independent, pluralistic and pragmatic global actor. So India is a responsible global actor. So therefore, this leadership, so this also offers an alternative to the great power rivalry traps as well. So we will not be involving in these great power rivalry traps. So that is also how India's strategic autonomy, navigating India's foreign policy and defense policy through the uncertain global order. So this is the essence and significance of the strategic autonomy. The strategic autonomy as a policy can make India as a responsible global actor as well, right? So I hope you have understood this topic. And the next very important and very crucial topic is that, so let's understand this topic as well. So the topic is unlocking India's growth potential and economic reforms overview. So this is in the context of the recent GST reforms. So this is also called as GST 2.0. In 57th GST Council meeting, the decision has been taken to rationalize the GST slabs from 5 to 2 slabs. So these two slabs consist of 5% of GST and 18% of GST. However, if you look at India's growth trajectory over a period of time, right from 1991, India's growth is an example of continuous reforms. For example, in 1991, we have launched the LPG reforms, which is also called as liberalization, privatization and globalization. And LPG reforms 1991 have brought in sustained growth and integration into the global economy. Because earlier Indian economy was considered as a closed economy, but after 1991 economic reforms, Indian economy was called as a globalized economy, linking Indian economy with the rest of the world. And after 1991 economic reforms, India has started growing at a faster and quicker pace as well. And followed by the 1991 economic reforms, in the year 2017 the goods and services tax has also been introduced. So this goods and services tax is a single taxation system with a theme of one nation, one tax. So this would prevent the cascading effect of the taxes, and it would also integrate the entire Indian taxation, indirect taxation system. So thereby simplifying the taxation and improving the compliance nationwide. So followed by the goods and services tax in the year 2017, on September 3rd, 2025, Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman announced GST 2.0, rationalizing the GST. Because earlier there were 5 slabs, and these 5 slabs are being rationalized into just 2 slabs, 18% and 5% of GST slabs, so to promote overall consumption in Indian economy. So let's understand about this in a very detailed and in-depth manner. So if you talk about GST 2.0, now it will simplify the GST framework with just 2 rate structure, or it will have just 2 slabs. So as I've already told you that earlier it has 5 slabs, but now it is going to have just 2 slabs, so which is 18% slab and 5% slab. Now apart from that, there is a 40% slab also, but this 40% of GST is only for the luxury items, alcohol, pan masala and tobacco products. So therefore it will be a complete rationalization of GST, so to promote domestic consumption, domestic production and manufacturing as well, because remember, India is a country with 1.5 billion people, so such a huge population. So therefore Indian economy should be based on consumption, right? So it should not be based on exports only, but we should also emphasize on consumption as well. And in fact it is a rationalization and harmonization of the tax rates. Because of this, it will ensure a consistent tax collections and clearer rules to further reduce the existing ambiguity and also compliance challenges for the businesses as well. So GST 2.0 will also operationalize GST Appellate Tribunal for dispute resolution. Now in fact, if we have a GST Appellate Tribunal, so that particular tribunal will resolve the pending cases that deals with the GST, and it would further strengthen the institutions, and it will also enable faster, transparent and resolution of tax disputes, and also improving the administrative efficiency and efficacy as well. And in fact, the rationalization and harmonization of GST slabs as part of GST 2.4 reforms, the expected outcomes would be lower compliance burdens, increased policy predictability and greater confidence among the investors as well, so that India can attract more and more foreign direct investment, and the domestic private investment can also be substantially increased, and there will be a policy stability and policy predictability. Ease of doing can also be increased in India, and all these factors will create conducive conditions for the investment and the business. And in fact, under GST 2.0, a great consumer and household relief has been provided by the Union Finance Minister, because we have now two slabs, and majority of the consumer and household products comes under either 5% tax slab or 0% tax slab. So therefore it is going to be a great relief, and it will also substantially boost consumption and manufacturing in India. So boost to manufacturing actually translates to more employment opportunities, better economic growth, economic development, social security and social safety nets as well. And in fact, it is being said that the lower GST rates on household essentials will reduce the consumer burden, will also reduce the inflation in the Indian economy. Because if you look at household items like soaps, toothpaste, shampoo, packaged foods, so now they are being moved into the lower tax brackets, which is a 5% of the tax bracket. So therefore the daily necessities of Indian consumers, so they will be much more affordable and cheaper. So it can increase the consumption and also the production as well. And apart from that, a GST on household equipment and also cement substantially reduced, so thereby making it more and more affordable to the normal people, and it will also give boost to the government housing program, which is Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana, Gramin and Urban. Right, so they have the team line called Housing for All through Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana Gramin. So reducing GST on cement will make it more and more affordable for the normal people. So thereby it will also benefit other key sectors, other important sectors like steel, tiles and paints as well. And another significant achievement through this GST reforms is that, so GST on life-saving drugs has actually been made zero. Around 33 life-saving drugs, GST on these 33 life-saving drugs actually made zero. So reducing taxes on essential medicines and medical devices helps make healthcare more affordable, and it will also strengthen India's position as a hub for global medicine or affordable medicine. And in fact, the fiscal policy that has been brought in by the Union Finance Minister actually balances the social welfare with the economic growth aspirations as well, because the GST 2.0 reforms are expected to ease the consumer burden, the consumer costs, and at the same time it can also sustain the broader economic advantages for the not just for the consumers but also for the larger economy and economic growth. And it is also expected that the GST is going to benefit the labor intensive sectors as well. So if you look at the labor intensive sectors in India, they are textiles, leather, footwear and toys. So all these sectors are labor intensive sectors. Now what the government has done is rationalization of GST rates. So rationalization of GST rates actually means that lower costs to protect margins, safeguard livelihoods of the people who have been engaged in the production of these items, and gainful employment opportunities in semi-urban and rural areas. So overall, the industry, which is a labor intensive industry, is going to benefit from the GST reforms. So the automotive sector, so another very important sector for India, and to some extent it is also a capital intensive, technology intensive and also labor intensive sector. So the GST on vehicles has also been reduced from 28% to just 18%. So now cheaper vehicles due to the GST rationalization, and it will further energizes the manufacturing hubs. So in fact, MSMEs are going to benefit from this GST rationalization because the inverted duties have been corrected. Now what are these inverted duties? So inverted duties actually means that the taxes on the raw materials is much more higher than the finished products. So therefore the corrections to the inverted duty structures and removal of refund thresholds on low value consignments, so all these factors will help MSMEs improve their competitiveness, and it will further eases the liquidity challenges that MSMEs have been facing in e-commerce and all other different sectors as well. So therefore the GST 2.4 reforms will also boost the labor intensive and export sectors as well. So apart from this, the next important topic is about the particularly vulnerable tribal groups. They are also being called as the PVTGs. So let's understand the background, the significance and why they are in news. Now why they are in news, let's understand the context. The context is that recently the Ministry of Tribal Affairs has emphasized that there is a need for a distinct counting of particularly vulnerable tribal groups during the upcoming census that the Registrar General of India is going to submit the census data by the year 2027. So therefore there is a need for a separate counting of the particularly vulnerable tribal group, so that there will be a possibility of focused welfare strategies. Now let's understand who are these particularly vulnerable tribal groups. So if we talk about the particularly vulnerable tribal groups, they are also scheduled tribes, but the most marginalized, most disadvantaged groups within the scheduled tribes. And in fact there is a criteria to recognize and identify the particularly vulnerable tribal groups. The criteria including the geographical isolation, stagnant population, pre-agrarian technologies, economic backwardness and low levels of literacy. So based on this criteria, the particularly vulnerable tribal groups are being identified in India. So as of now there are 75 particularly vulnerable tribal groups all across India, and they were first identified by the Deba Commission in the year 1960-61 with 52 groups, and now particularly vulnerable tribal groups. So there are 75 PVTGs in 18 states and 1 union territory, which is Andaman and Nicobar Islands. And in fact, why the Ministry of Tribal Affairs has recommended to revisit the criteria or asked for calculating them or measuring them as a different category, counting differently, is because we should have a proper idea about the particularly vulnerable tribal groups. What is their social condition, what is economic and educational condition, so that if we brought in any policies, those policies will be specifically targeted at the PVTGs. And in fact, experts are also in recent times have been suggesting to update the criteria of identifying and recognizing the particularly vulnerable tribal groups based on the geographical isolation, to align with the contemporary realities faced by these groups. So in fact, as I've already told you that the particularly vulnerable tribal groups, there are around 75 groups who are living in 18 states and one union territory. So there are certain challenges that the PVTGs have been facing, and enumeration is also challenging, and the data visibility is also another major challenge, because as of now there is no separate enumeration of PVTGs. So if I'm not wrong, this would be the first time that a separate enumeration of PVTGs is being done, right? So in fact, as of now, PVTGs are also considered as a group of people within the scheduled tribes in the past census. So therefore, calculating them as a distinct group for the first time could be difficult. And secondly, grouping under the common nomenclature, because there are multiple PVTGs grouped, so they're collectively limiting individual visibility in the data sets, and 40 out of 75 PVTGs are a single entry. And in fact, Baigas accounted separately in 2011 census, and Marias included only after 2013 legislative additions. And data published only for main STs, and in fact Registrar General of India, who are responsible for conducting census, so they conventionally publishes data for main scheduled tribes subsuming the subgroups. So in fact it is also going to have an impact on policy and welfare as well, because limited focus on PVTGs further hinders the accurate design of policies and the welfare programs, which primarily targets the particularly vulnerable tribal groups. So the next important topic is, recently World Health Organization has declared end to Mpox global emergency, right? Because there is a sustained case decline over a period of time, and because of this particular reason, so World Health Organization declares that Mpox is no longer a global health emergency, right? So in fact a sustained decline in cases, and this sustained decline in cases has led to this announcement from the World Health Organization. And there has been a major reduction in the African hotspots such as Democratic Republic of Congo, Burundi, Sierra Leone, Uganda. In all these countries there is a sustained decline of Mpox cases, right? So Mpox is a viral disease. It spreads through the close contact. It is a contagious disease, and World Health Organization has declared Mpox as a public health emergency in the year 2023. And the current data, the existing data about Mpox, it reveals that the Mpox outbreak is under control right now. So that's all in this lecture, and if you like our lecture, please subscribe our YouTube channel and also hit the like. Thank you.